In November 1914, Vice Admiral Maximilian von Spee inflicted Britain's worst naval defeat in over a century, then predicted his own death with chilling accuracy. Exactly 5 weeks later, he and both his sons lay at the bottom of the South Atlantic, destroyed by the very weapons their victory had summoned. The campaign of the German East Asia Squadron remains one of the most dramatic naval episodes of World War I. A 12,000-mile voyage across the Pacific, by a commander who knew from the beginning he could never return home, culminating in 2 battles that revealed how completely the battlecruiser had rendered traditional armored cruisers obsolete. The strategic chess match between von Spee and Admiral Fisher, the revolutionary mind behind Britain's dreadnought fleet, compressed into just 5 weeks some of the war's most consequential naval decisions. Fisher responded to the Coronel disaster within 6 hours, dispatching his beloved battlecruisers to hunt a man he'd never met but understood perfectly, a professional, who would fight rather than surrender and who had just expended half his irreplaceable ammunition, achieving a victory that sealed his fate. Maximilian Johannes Maria Hubert Reichsgraf von Spee was born on June 22, 1861, in Copenhagen, the youngest of 5 sons of Imperial Count Rudolf von Spee, from an ancient Catholic Prussian family of Rhenish nobility. His mother, Fernande Tutin, was Danish. Contemporaries described him as tall, of military bearing, blue-eyed, with wavy hair, bushy eyebrows, and a beard. One colleague noted he looked as though he had swallowed a broom handle, a reference to his impeccably straight posture. Von Spee entered the Kaiserliche Marine at 16 and rose steadily through the ranks. He saw his first combat during the Boxer Rebellion in 1900 at Qingdao and on the Yangtze. By 1910, he had made Rear Admiral, and in December 1912, he received the most coveted post in the German Navy, command of the East Asia Squadron, based at Tsingtao in Germany's Chinese concession. He was promoted to Vice Admiral the following year. What made his command distinctive was the presence of both his sons. Lieutenant Otto von Spee, born July 10, 1890, served as an officer aboard the light cruiser SMS Nürnberg. Lieutenant Heinrich von Spee, born April 24, 1893, served aboard the armored cruiser SMS Gneisenau. All 3 would die on the same day. As a commander, von Spee was a strict taskmaster who held frequent gunnery and torpedo practice until his ships performed like precision instruments. Coaling at sea was rehearsed until crews could execute it flawlessly. The result was that the East Asia Squadron won the Kaiser's Cup for marksmanship 2 consecutive years. A British naval correspondent observed that the German squadron was like no other in the Kaiser's navy, commanded by professional officers and manned by long service ratings. The long distances from home required continuity of service, creating extraordinary unit cohesion and morale. Von Spee was also deeply chivalrous. After Coronel, when a toast was proposed in Valparaiso to the damnation of the British Navy, von Spee walked out of the function. He had been friends with Admiral Cradock before the war, during their service together in the Far East, and remained ever conscious of the vicissitudes of war and the quality of his opponents. This combination of professionalism and honor would define his campaign from its opening moves. When war broke out in August 1914, von Spee's East Asia Squadron comprised an impressive force centered on 2 powerful armored cruisers. SMS Scharnhorst, his flagship, and her sister ship SMS Gneisenau, were modern vessels completed in 1907 to 1908, displacing 11,616 tons and capable of 22.5 knots. Each carried 8 8.2-inch guns in twin turrets, supported by 6 5.9-inch secondary guns. Both ships had won fleet gunnery prizes and were crewed by long-service volunteers, the finest shooting squadron in the German service. Supporting the armored cruisers were 3 light cruisers, SMS Emden, SMS Nürnberg, and SMS Leipzig, each armed with 10 4.1-inch guns. SMS Dresden would later join from the Atlantic. But von Spee understood immediately that he faced an impossible strategic situation. Japan declared war on Germany on August 23, 1914, and joined the Allied powers in besieging Tsingtao. The single Australian battlecruiser HMAS Australia was, von Spee admitted, superior to his entire force by itself. British cruisers from China and Hong Kong, French and Russian warships, and New Zealand forces were all converging. Remaining in Asian waters meant certain destruction. Von Spee assessed his options with clear-eyed realism. He could head west toward the Indian Ocean, but that route bristled with British bases. He could remain in the Central Pacific, but that offered no future. Or he could head east toward South America, where Chile had pro-German sympathies and friendly Germans in neutral ports could arrange coal supplies. He chose the third option, knowing it offered the possibility of eventually breaking through to Germany via Cape Horn, and knowing also that he was almost certainly sailing to his death. "I am quite homeless," he later explained. "I cannot reach Germany. We possess no other secure harbor. I must plow the seas of the world doing as much mischief as I can, until my ammunition is exhausted, or a foe far superior in power succeeds in catching me." The East Asia Squadron's voyage across the Pacific was an extraordinary feat of seamanship and logistics. On August 13th, von Spee's ships departed Pagan Island in the Marianas, where they had concentrated after the war's outbreak. At a captain's conference there, Korvettenkapitän Karl von Müller of SMS Emden convinced von Spee to detach his ship for independent commerce raiding in the Indian Ocean. Though von Spee preferred keeping his squadron together, he recognized Emden could disrupt enemy trade and tie down Allied resources. It proved an inspired decision. Emden would capture or sink 29 Allied ships before HMAS Sydney destroyed her on November 9th. The armored cruisers consumed approximately 100 tons of coal per day at cruising speed, rising to 500 tons per day at 20 knots. They could carry a maximum of 2,000 tons, requiring coaling stops every 8 to 10 days. Von Spee had assembled a supply train of colliers with a total capacity of 16,593 tons, but every port call risked detection. The squadron moved east through the Marshall Islands, reaching Christmas Island on September 7th. At German Samoa on September 14th, von Spee found Allied forces already in occupation and declined to shell them to avoid damaging German property and civilian lives. Then came the fateful attack on Papeete, Tahiti, on September 22nd. The German ships sank a French gunboat, but the French burned 2,300 tons of coal to deny it to them. And critically, the attack revealed the squadron's position to the British Admiralty. The ammunition expended would prove irreplaceable. By mid-October, the full squadron had assembled at Easter Island, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, Nürnberg, Leipzig, and Dresden, in violation of Chilean neutrality. On October 26th, they completed final coaling at Masa Fuera in the Juan Fernandez Islands. Von Spee was running low on 8.2-inch shells and had no means to replenish them. But ahead lay the Chilean coast, and intelligence suggested a weak British force patrolling there under Rear Admiral Sir Christopher Cradock. Rear Admiral Christopher Cradock was a 52-year-old officer of great gallantry who had earned distinction during the Boxer Rebellion, where he commanded British, German, and Japanese sailors during the capture of the Taku forts and the relief of Tientsin. He was close to the royal family, having served on the royal yacht, and was known to his friends as Kit. He never married, kept a dog that accompanied him at sea, and once commented he would choose to die, either during an accident while hunting or during action at sea. His squadron was dangerously inadequate. HMS Good Hope, his flagship, was a Drake-class armored cruiser completed in 1902, 12 years old, and described by the Times History of the Great War as one of the worst and most expensive types of ship ever built for the Navy in modern times. She was an immense target and much undergunned for her displacement. Her main armament consisted of just two 9.2-inch guns in single turrets, supported by 16 6-inch guns in casemates. HMS Monmouth was even weaker, an 11-year-old armored cruiser with no guns larger than 6 inches. Both ships had been recommissioned with largely reservist crews who had little opportunity for gunnery practice. Cradock also had HMS Glasgow, a modern light cruiser, and HMS Otranto, an armed merchant cruiser completely unsuitable for naval combat. The pre-dreadnought battleship HMS Canopus, with her 4 12-inch guns, was theoretically assigned to support him, but she was mechanically decrepit, her engineer officer reportedly ill mentally, and Cradock believed she could only make 12 knots. He ordered her to escort the colliers while he pressed ahead. The Admiralty's orders were ambiguous, and critical messages never reached Cradock. On October 27th, the newly appointed First Sea Lord, Admiral Fisher, ordered Craddock not to engage von Spee without Canopus and dispatched HMS Defense as reinforcement. Neither message arrived. On October 28th, Winston Churchill sent another message stating Craddock was not required to fight Spee's squadron without Canopus. This, too, failed to reach him. Before departing the Falkland Islands, Craddock left a letter for Admiral Hedworth Moo, stating he did not intend to suffer the fate of Rear Admiral Ernest Troubridge, who faced court-martial for failing to engage German warships in the Mediterranean. He told the governor of the Falklands, "I shall not see you again," and left his medals and decorations ashore for safekeeping. He sailed knowing the odds were against him, and sailed anyway. On November 1, 1914, both squadrons were searching for each other off the Chilean coast. Von Spee expected to find only the light cruiser Glasgow. Craddock believed he would encounter only Leipzig. At 4:17 p.m., Glasgow sighted smoke, and then the unmistakable silhouettes of Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and a third warship. The entire German squadron was present. Von Spee demonstrated masterful tactical patience. When the squadrons first sighted each other, the late afternoon sun was behind the British ships. If Craddock could force action before sunset, German gunners would be blinded by the glare. Von Spee deliberately held off, using his superior speed to maintain distance until sunset at approximately 7 p.m. Then he closed. As a survivor from Glasgow later wrote, "The sun was now setting immediately behind us, as viewed from the enemy, and as long as it remained above the horizon, all the advantage was with us. Shortly before 7 p.m., the sun set, entirely changing the conditions of visibility, and whereas in the failing light it was difficult for us to see the enemy, our ships became clearly silhouetted against the afterglow, as viewed from them. The heavy seas worked against the British. The lower 6-inch gun casemates on Good Hope and Monmouth could only be used in calm waters and probably never came into action. When Scharnhorst opened fire at approximately 12,000 yards, her third salvo knocked out Good Hope's forward 9.2-inch gun before it could fire. Within 3 minutes, Monmouth was ablaze. The German gunnery was devastating. By 7:35 p.m., von Spee estimated Good Hope had been hit approximately 30 to 40 times. At around 7:50 p.m., in total darkness, an immense explosion tore through Good Hope. A sheet of flame rose 200 feet into the air. Her forward section exploded, she broke apart, and sank. No one witnessed the exact moment of her death. There were no survivors. Monmouth, badly damaged and listing heavily to port, turned away and attempted to escape. At approximately 9 p.m., SMS Nürnberg stumbled upon her in the darkness. Nürnberg opened fire, then ceased to give Monmouth the opportunity to surrender. She shone her searchlight pointedly on the British ensign. Monmouth did not strike her colors. At 9:58 p.m., Nürnberg opened fire again at point-blank range with 75 shells. Monmouth capsized and sank. The seas were too rough to attempt rescue. British losses totaled 1,654 men, including Admiral Craddock. German losses, 0 killed, 3 wounded. It was Britain's worst naval squadron defeat since the Battle of Grand Port in 1810, over a century earlier. 2 days after Coronel, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Nürnberg entered Valparaiso harbor. The German community celebrated wildly, welcoming von Spee as a conquering hero. He refused to join the festivities. When presented with a bouquet of flowers, he declined them with the words, "These will do nicely for my grave." In the same conversation, he added, "You must not forget that I am quite homeless." Von Spee understood his situation with brutal clarity. He had expended approximately 40% of his irreplaceable main-caliber ammunition, 422 shells from Scharnhorst alone, leaving only 350 remaining. He had no access to repair facilities. His ship's machinery was worn from months at sea, and he knew powerful British forces would be dispatched to avenge Coronel. The Royal Navy had not suffered such a humiliation in living memory. It would respond with overwhelming force. His victory was hollow. He had won a battle and ensured his own destruction. Admiral Sir John Jackie Fisher was 73 years old when he returned as First Sea Lord on October 30th, 1914, replacing Prince Louis of Battenberg just 2 days before Coronel. Fisher was considered the second most important figure in British naval history after Lord Nelson, a revolutionary who had transformed the Royal Navy, creating HMS Dreadnought in 1906 and championing the battlecruiser concept. He was autocratic, energetic, and ruthless. "Anyone who opposes me, I crush." His most famous dictum captured his philosophy. The essence of war is violence. Moderation in war is imbecility. On November 4, 1914, 6 hours after learning of Coronel, Fisher made his decision. He immediately ordered 2 battlecruisers, HMS Invincible and HMS Inflexible, detached from the Grand Fleet and dispatched to hunt von Spee's squadron. The choice of battlecruisers was deliberate. Fisher had designed them precisely for this purpose, to catch any cruiser and destroy it with impunity. HMS Invincible and HMS Inflexible displaced 17,250 tons and could make 25 knots, 3 knots faster than von Spee's armored cruisers. More critically, they carried 8 12-inch guns each, with shells weighing 850 pounds versus the German 238-pound 8.2-inch shells. The British guns had an effective range of 16,400 yards. The German guns could not effectively engage beyond 13,500 yards. Fisher was sending weapons that could destroy von Spee's ships while remaining beyond effective return fire. The dockyard at Devonport estimated the ships would be ready by November 13th. Fisher was uncompromising. They would sail on November 11th, with dockyard workers on board if necessary. They departed on schedule, workmen still completing repairs as the ships headed south. For command, Fisher selected Vice Admiral Doveton Sturdy, a choice laden with irony. Sturdy had been Chief of War Staff at the Admiralty, and Fisher blamed him for the worldwide dispersal of weak units that had contributed to Coronel. Fisher refused to work with him and wanted him gone. Winston Churchill proposed an elegant solution: give Sturdy command of the South Atlantic Squadron, simultaneously removing him from the Admiralty and offering him a chance at redemption. Sturdy's orders were unambiguous. Your main and most important duty is to search for the German armored cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and bring them to action. All other considerations are to be subordinated to this end. Both squadrons now sailed toward a rendezvous neither anticipated. Von Spee, after coaling in Chilean waters, rounded Cape Horn on the night of December 1st to 2nd. He captured the British bark Drumyer, loaded with coal, and spent 3 days at Picton Island unloading her cargo, a delay that would prove fatal. On December 6th, he held a captain's conference to determine whether to raid the Falkland Islands. 3 captains opposed the attack. Von Spee and 2 others favored it. He believed destroying Britain's only base in the region would disrupt their naval power. The raid was unnecessary. His ships had sufficient coal, but he overruled the dissenting voices. Sturdy's squadron, meanwhile, crossed the Atlantic at a leisurely 10 knots to conserve fuel. Captain John Luce of HMS Glasgow, the Coronel survivor, persuaded Sturdy to depart Brazil 1 day earlier than planned. This single day would prove decisive. Sturdy's force arrived at Port Stanley on the morning of December 7th. Von Spee arrived the following morning, December 8th. Had the German admiral not wasted 3 days at Picton Island, he would have found only the decrepit Canopus guarding the harbor. Had Sturdy not departed early, he would have been caught coaling when the Germans appeared. The margins were razor thin. At 7:50 a.m. on December 8th, the observation tower at Sapper Hill reported smoke on the horizon. Von Spee had sent Gneisenau and Nürnberg ahead as a vanguard to investigate Port Stanley and destroy the wireless station. The main German force, Scharnhorst, Dresden, and Leipzig, waited 20 miles offshore. In the harbor, the British were caught unprepared. Invincible and Inflexible were coaling. Cornwall had her engines at 6 hours' notice. Bristol had her engines dismantled for repairs. Only Kent was ready to move immediately. Clouds of black smoke billowed from the harbor as crews frantically fired up boilers. At 9:19 a.m., HMS Canopus, grounded in the harbor as a guardship, her guns controlled from an observation station on high ground, opened fire at 11,000 yards. 4 12-inch shells screamed toward the approaching German scouts. This was the first warning von Spee received that something was terribly wrong. Then came the sight that sealed his fate. Officers aboard Gneisenau and Nürnberg spotted the distinctive tripod masts rising above Port Stanley, masts that could only belong to British capital ships. Von Spee had not found a weakly defended coaling station. He had sailed directly into a trap containing 2 battlecruisers. The German scouts immediately turned away at full speed to rejoin von Spee. At approximately 10 a.m., the entire German squadron was fleeing southeast at maximum speed, 15 miles ahead of the pursuing British. At 10:20 a.m., Sturdy hoisted the signal, "General Chase," the dramatic order giving each captain complete discretion to catch the enemy. The weather could not have been more different from Coronel. The seas were calm, visibility was perfect, and bright sunlight illuminated the fleeing German ships. At Coronel, darkness and rough weather had favored German gunnery. At the Falklands, the conditions favored the battlecruisers' long-range guns. At 11:30 a.m., confident of overtaking his prey, Sturdy ordered his crews below to change from coaling clothes and have a meal. At 12:47 p.m., with the range closing, Sturdy signaled, "Open fire and engage the enemy." At 12:55 p.m., HMS Inflexible opened fire from her forward turret at 16,500 yards, a range at which no British warship had ever engaged a live target. The age of long-range naval gunnery had arrived. By 1:20 p.m., von Spee recognized escape was impossible. His ship's bottoms were fouled after months at sea, reducing their maximum speed to approximately 20 knots. The British battlecruisers were making 25 or more. The mathematics were inescapable. He made his final decision as a commander and a father. At approximately 1:25 p.m., von Spee ordered his 3 light cruisers, Leipzig, Nürnberg, and Dresden, to scatter toward South America and resume commerce raiding. Then he turned Scharnhorst and Gneisenau directly into the path of the pursuing battlecruisers, hoping to draw fire and give his light cruisers a chance to escape. It was an act of self-sacrifice. Von Spee knew his armored cruisers could not survive an engagement with Invincible and Inflexible. But he could buy time for his 3 smaller ships, and he could ensure that his squadron died fighting. The duel that followed was one-sided but prolonged. British gunnery was hampered by funnel smoke obscuring targets, and the Germans maneuvered skillfully, but the fundamental disparity could not be overcome. The British 12-inch shells delivered 3.6 times the destructive energy of the German 8.2-inch rounds. More critically, Sturdy could stand off at ranges where his guns were effective, but the German shells, even when they struck home, lacked penetrating power. The Germans scored 83 hits on British ships, but caused minimal damage. By 3:30 p.m., Scharnhorst's 3rd funnel had been shot away and several guns were silent. She was trying desperately to bring her undamaged starboard guns into action. Shortly after 4 p.m., she was listing heavily with fires raging throughout her hull. Her upper works, one observer noted, seemed to be but a shambles of torn and twisted steel and iron, and through the holes in her side could be seen dull red glows as the flames gained mastery between the decks. Von Spee's last signal to Gneisenau was transmitted at approximately this time: "Try to save yourself." At 4:04 p.m., Scharnhorst listed suddenly to port. At 4:17 p.m., she capsized and sank. The British, focused on pursuing Gneisenau, made no effort to rescue survivors. There were none to rescue. All 840 officers and men went down with their ship, including Vice Admiral Maximilian von Spee. Gneisenau fought on alone against both battlecruisers, now joined by the armored cruiser Carnarvon. She absorbed over 50 12-inch shell hits. At 5:15 p.m., she fired her last effective shot, striking Invincible. With ammunition exhausted, approximately 600 of her crew were already dead or wounded, Captain Merker ordered the survivors on deck with hammocks and life support items. At 6 p.m., Gneisenau heeled over suddenly. Men were seen walking on her side as she lay on her beam ends. At 6:02 p.m., she capsized and sank. Approximately 175 to 215 survivors were pulled from the freezing water. Lieutenant Heinrich von Spee was not among them. SMS Nürnberg, with Lieutenant Otto von Spee aboard, was pursued by HMS Kent. Officially, Kent could make only 22 knots, to Nürnberg's 22.5. But Kent's crew performed an extraordinary act of desperation. They burned every piece of wood aboard the ship, furniture, officers' trunks, mess tables, to boost steam pressure, driving their ship to an incredible 25 knots. When Nürnberg suffered 2 boiler explosions around 6:30 p.m., her fate was sealed. By 6:25 p.m., Nürnberg was stationary, burning fiercely, with only 2 guns still operational. Her ensign continued flying. At 6:35 p.m., the flag was hauled down, and Kent ceased fire. But as Nürnberg sank at 7:27 p.m., a group of men were seen waving a German ensign from the upturned hull. Only 7 survivors were rescued alive. Lieutenant Otto von Spee was among the dead. SMS Leipzig was hunted down by Glasgow and Cornwall, finally sinking at 9:23 p.m. after her ammunition was exhausted. 18 survivors were rescued. Only SMS Dresden escaped into the gathering darkness and deteriorating weather, eventually hiding among the islands of Tierra del Fuego until British ships cornered her on March 14, 1915. She was scuttled by her crew to avoid capture. The Battle of the Falkland Islands was one of the most lopsided naval engagements in history. German losses totaled approximately 2,200 dead, all 840 men of Scharnhorst, approximately 600 of Gneisenau's 764, roughly 315 of Nürnberg's 322, and approximately 276 of Leipzig's 294. Only 215 Germans survived to become prisoners. British losses: 10 killed and 19 wounded. The contrast with Coronel, just 37 days earlier, was stark. At Coronel, evenly matched armored cruisers fought in rough seas at dusk. Superior German gunnery and tactical positioning proved decisive. At the Falklands, the technological mismatch rendered German skill irrelevant. The same ships that had inflicted Britain's worst naval defeat in a century were destroyed in a single afternoon because they faced an evolutionary leap in naval firepower they could not match. The campaign demonstrated with terrible clarity the obsolescence of the armored cruiser. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau represented the apex of their type: fast, well-armed, superbly trained. But against Fisher's battlecruisers, their 238-pound shells could not penetrate armor designed to resist them at range, while British 850-pound shells tore them apart. Speed, range, and weight of broadside had combined to create a weapon against which traditional cruisers had no answer. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Britain had demonstrated it could project overwhelming naval power anywhere in the world within weeks. Fisher correctly identified the most likely location for von Spee's appearance, concentrated decisive force there, and destroyed the threat entirely. The global reach of the British Empire, its network of coaling stations, its intelligence capabilities, its industrial base, proved insurmountable for Germany's distant operations. Von Spee's campaign also illustrated the fundamental problem facing German surface commerce raiders. His squadron consumed enormous quantities of coal, ammunition, and supplies that could not be replenished far from home. Every success, Papet, Coronel, expended irreplaceable resources. The armored cruisers that won at Coronel arrived at the Falklands with half their ammunition already spent and machinery worn from months of hard steaming. Germany lacked overseas bases to support sustained operations against an enemy with global maritime infrastructure. By December 1914, every German surface raider on the high seas had been destroyed, captured, or interned. Emden by HMS Sydney on November 9th, Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, Nürnberg, and Leipzig at the Falklands on December 8th. Karlsruhe by accidental explosion on November 4th. Dresden eventually scuttled in March 1915. Germany would thereafter rely on submarines for commerce warfare, a strategic shift forced by the complete elimination of its surface raider capability. For the battlecruiser concept, the Falklands provided validation, but Jutland would provide a bitter corrective. The same HMS Invincible that destroyed von Spee's armored cruisers exploded at the Battle of Jutland on May 31, 1916, when her magazine detonated under battleship fire, killing 1,026 of her 1,031 crew. Fisher's eggshells armed with sledgehammers were devastating against cruisers, but fatally vulnerable against equals. The concept was valid only for limited roles. December 8th remains a public holiday in the Falkland Islands. A monument erected in Stanley in 1927, featuring the goddess of victory looking out to sea, is the southernmost World War I memorial on Earth. In 2019, almost exactly 105 years after her sinking, the wreck of SMS Scharnhorst was discovered at 1,610 meters depth, 98 nautical miles southeast of the Falklands. Wilhelm Graf von Spee, head of the family, called the discovery bittersweet, noting, "As a family, we lost a father and his two sons on one day." The German commemorative medal struck after the battle shows Admiral von Spee with his arms around both his sons, bearing the inscription, Deutsche Helden, liegen drei Grafen Spee. German heroes, there lie three Counts Spee. In 1936, Nazi Germany named a pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee in his honor. That ship's christening was performed by von Spee's daughter, Huberta. With terrible symmetry, the Admiral Graf Spee was scuttled in South American waters in December 1939 after the Battle of the River Plate. Exactly 25 years after its namesake's death, only a few hundred miles from where the original squadron met its end. Von Spee had predicted his fate with flowers in a Chilean harbor. He understood what Fisher understood, that the victory at Coronel ensured British vengeance, and that no amount of seamanship could overcome technological obsolescence. The campaign of the East Asia Squadron demonstrated that in modern industrial warfare, battles could be decided before the first shot was fired, not by men, but by the specifications written in shipyard drafting rooms years before. Admiral Maximilian von Spee's campaign across the Pacific remains a masterclass in the tragedy of professional duty. He was a brilliant commander who recognized from the war's first days that he was sailing toward his death. He extracted the maximum possible achievement from his doomed situation, defeating a British squadron, maintaining his men's morale across 12,000 miles of ocean, and finally sacrificing himself to give his light cruisers a chance to escape. His chivalry toward his enemies and his realistic assessment of his position elevated him beyond mere tactical competence into a figure of genuine historical stature. The strategic chess match between von Spee and Fisher compressed into 5 weeks some of World War I's most consequential decisions. Fisher's 6-hour response to Coronel demonstrated the decisive leadership that had modernized the Royal Navy. Von Spee's choice to turn and fight at the Falklands rather than scatter demonstrated the professional honor that had made his squadron the finest in German service. Both men understood the stakes completely. The difference was that Fisher commanded the resources of a global empire, while von Spee commanded ships that could not be resupplied, repaired, or replaced. The deaths of von Spee and both his sons on December 8, 1914, give the campaign its emotional resonance. 3 generations of the same family died within 3 hours, each aboard a different ship, each fighting to the end. When Scharnhorst's last signal to Gneisenau, "Try to save yourself," crossed the water, a father was releasing his son to survive if he could. Heinrich did not survive. Neither did Otto. The flowers that von Spee had refused in Valparaiso had found their purpose.